amazing turnout. Thank you. And welcome to our second Telford Jerusalem Ladies Coffee Club, Telford Jerusalem GUSH ETZION, I think. It's wonderful to see you all and to see so many new faces. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our guest speaker, Richard Shavei, Tzion. Richard and his wife Cheryl, in 1981. He was one of the first students at Yeshiva College. He was an active member of the Nakhiva in South Africa. They lived in Efrat for many years and now live in Ramon. By profession, Richard's an accountant that retired a few months ago. I think he's more busy than ever. He is on the editorial board of Telford, and I'm sure many of you have read his articles in both Telford and the Jerusalem Post. He is a poet, a great cook, I can vouch for that.
You talk about somebody else.
And an expert on Chazanut. He founded the well-known Jerusalem Times main choir. Besides all this, he also creates legacy videos. He and his wife Cheryl, who is here with us today, are proud parents of 3 daughters and active grandparents of 12 grandchildren. Without further ado, I'm happy to invite Richard.
Thank you very much. Everybody sing along with the chorus. The truth is that I could listen for the next 50 minutes just to the song. It's such a beautiful song, a Moti Hammer song that is sung by Chava Alberstein. And it talks about the fact that every one of us, everyone in this room, and everyone in the history of the human race is a weave in a magnificent embroidery. Each one of us is a weave, and therefore we're all somehow connected to each other. And whether we recognize or not, you know, in life, you cannot every single day when you're eating an apple think about the great human chain of events that occur from the planting of the seed of the apple to the time that you eat it, and think about all those people that contributed to that particular action. But I do believe that once in a while, it's appropriate and it's also very, very valuable to us for ourselves to take a step back and think about all the people that affect our lives, both knowingly, unknowingly, subliminally, and without any knowledge at all. And tonight, I would like to tell you about a few of these people. In GUSH ETZION today, do we all know what GUSH ETZION is? When I refer to GUSH ETZION? Okay, that swathe of land between Bethlehem and Hebron, straddling now either side of the main number, is it number 60? Number 60 road, with many yeshuvim and kibbutzim and towns and villages. So in GUSH ETZION, in just about every single yeshuv, there is some kind of South African presence. Here and there, for example, my sister lives in Elazar. Not in any organized way, but there are a few South Africans there. There are 2 major concentrations of South Africans and all their children and all their grandchildren that are living or have lived a major portion of their lives in the GUSH. In Anon Shvut, there was a Garen that moved in there starting from around about 1973. And that group was very much a part of the development of Anon Shvut, although Anon Shvut itself actually started up in 1970, but they were there early enough to create a presence and add to the Hawaii, to the atmosphere of the town. Recognition of the contribution of South Africans to The second group, large group of Chaverim, were basically the Chanikim of those Chevra that went to Alonshwood. 10 years later, in 1983, many South African families of my generation, including us, were amongst the founding fathers and mothers of the Yishuv, which is now a town called Efrat. Of the first 100 families that moved in within about 8 or 9 months of the first ones moving in, of the first 100, there were over 20 of them were South Africans. My daughter, our daughter, Shira, and her husband Idor, and their son, our grandson, Arieli, were just a couple of days ago at an open meeting at the Or Torah Neve Shmuel High School for prospective boys wanting to apply to the school. They had this meeting, and the principal spoke, and the son spoke, and whatever, and they had one of the current pupils spoke. And Shira says to me, he spoke with a mixture of eloquence, with achievement, but also with a great modesty and respect. And she says to me that she was not surprised to hear afterwards that he was a grandson of one of the South African Chevra. Happened to be Johnny and Mickey Mervis' son. She says to me, but it goes beyond that. She lives in Efrat, she works in ETZION, and she feels that this whole kind of vibe, achievement, modesty, respect, politeness, kind of permeates the whole GUSH. And her theory is that it's a combination of the South African in the mix, and the whole idea that GUSH ETZION started off as a kibbutz and chalutz, a kind of enterprise. So there are hundreds of South Africans in all of, as I mentioned before. And the question that I asked myself, and I want to pose to you this evening, and hopefully give you my own personal answer, is this just a coincidence? Does it just happen to be so that South Africans gravitated to the GUSH? Or is there some kind of underlying, deep, profound reason that today there are these South Africans that are part of the fabric of GUSH ETZION? There is at the Golani Junction in the Galil, the Lavi forest. It's very close to, I don't know if any of you have been up to the Lavi guest house. The Lavi is surrounded by forests, and in that forest is this huge, rough stone-hewed sculpture. It's like a 5 stones. It's almost like kind of a serita de broad that kind of tapers off into the sky. And next to that monumental sculpture, there's a little modest stone wall, and on that stone wall are engraved 88 names. These are people that, from disparate kind of circumstances, some were religious, some were secular, some were men, some were women. Many affiliated to Zionist movements and others not. But the two things that are common to each one of the names on that wall are that they were either South Africans themselves or they were the descendants of South African parents. That's the first thing. And the second is that all of those holy people died in the establishment and the defense of the state of Israel. The first name on that list is Abraham Katz. Abraham Katz, quite paradoxically actually, did not live very long in South Africa. He was born in the Baltic seaport town of Polangan in Lithuania. And if I had to describe his character in one word, I would use one of the very, very few Yiddish words that I know, and that is verbrennter. His parents, his father was a prominent rabbi and Mizrahi activist. His mother was a very pious woman. And he, Abraham Katz, took after his parents. But, careful the water. But he was born in 1912, and 5 years after he was born was the Russian Revolution. And the Bolsheviks are now ruling in this entire area. And Zionist activity is absolutely forbidden. But that doesn't bother Abraham Katz. And as a young teenager, he's arrested for attending a clandestine Zionist meeting. And is only freed when his father undertakes to make sure that he will not be involved in Zionist activities again. And therefore, probably, this is my own assumption, the reason why he left on his own as an 18-year-old Lithuania is because of that. He travels on his own to South Africa, where he has an uncle living in Johannesburg, and at the age of 18, in order to support himself, he becomes a furniture salesman. But of course, he has a dream for greater religious Zionists. And he wants to find like-minded Chevra in Johannesburg who share that same kind of dream. 1930, when he arrives in Johannesburg, is a kind of a breakthrough period for the Zionist youth movements in South Africa. The South African Zionist Federation, which I find quite remarkable, was actually established in 1898, just 1 year after the first Zionist Congress in Basel that Herzl convened. Just 1 year later, the South Africans create their own Zionist Federation. And through those years, youth groups, local youth groups start to pop up around the country. Believe it or not, I mean, obviously in Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, Port Elizabeth, but even places like Vryheid and but they're all localized. They're all groups. They don't not really connected to each other, and they don't have a particular philosophy. But in 1931, these Chevra get together and convene a conference in Bloemfontein, and probably because it was kind of halfway between everybody, and they create the first Zionist Youth Council of South Africa. In 1931, a man named Norman Lurie gets a couple of his Chevra together, and they create the Habonim youth movement. It's the first youth movement in South Africa which has a uniform. Soon after that, Beitar, very, very influenced by the fact that Zeb Jabotinsky himself comes twice to South Africa and spends a number of months each time in South Africa, which really gives great impetus to the whole revisionist movement, and that is probably why the revisionists were so strong in South Africa. There were very few Dati Jewish youngsters living in South Africa at the time. Very few. But one of them was a man named Joe Green. Joe Green, every time I mention a name here, I have to try and hold myself back from crying. Because they just touch me so much. Joe Green was a deeply feeling idealist, a religious man with principles. For example, he was a vegetarian based on his Yahadut. He took a treatise of Rav Kook and translated it into English on the importance of being a vegetarian as a Jew. He gets it into his head, Mizrahi, which is the kind of the adult Dati Zionist organization, which was first started in 1902 in Eastern Europe, opens up is established in Johannesburg in around about 1930, 1931, and Joe Green looks around for Chevra to try and get together a young Mizrahi. And the two people he encounters first who are enthused by this whole idea are Abraham Katz and Leonard Oshry, later Rabbi Leonard Oshry. Yeah. And this is Abraham Katz, by the way, these are his parents. And the three of them, together with a small group of others, create the Young Mizrahi, which soon after created a little kind of a youth movement under that, because they were already in their 20s, called Hashomer Hadati. Okay, Hashomer Hadati, for all intents and purposes, is Bnei Akiva. Okay, in fact, here is the Shomer Hadati Semel, their badge. And you will note that the badge has got Torah Ba'avodah on it. It's the same motto as Bnei Akiva. The idea was a religious Torah-based way of life, and Avodah was the idea of going to Israel and pioneering the settling of the land. Oshry and Green are intent on building up this movement, but Abraham Katz was not at all. He wanted to fulfill his dream, to come on Aliyah to Israel. Now, to come on Aliyah to Israel now it's a process. Okay, yeah, you've got to fill out forms and things like that, but you can probably do it on the net. And then you take a plane and you arrive and the Telfed Hebrew are waiting for you. Okay, I'm not diminishing that at all. It's a mission. But the mission of Abraham Katz was a lot in those days. He had to get permission from the South African Science Federation, from British. He sailed up the east coast of Africa through Egypt. And we're talking about, he leaves the shores of South Africa in 1935. He's only 5 years in South Africa. He travels up on his own to Palestine, and now he's looking once again for a like-minded group that he can join. He hasn't just come to live in Tel Aviv or Petah Tikva. He's looking to find a group of Chaverim that he can be a part of pioneering the land. And so it happened to be that this is 1935, the first chief rabbi of Eretz Israel, Rav Kook, Abraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, dies in the middle of 1935. A whole group of Hebrew, mainly from Eastern Europe, get together to put together a group, and they call themselves Futsat Abraham, after Abraham Kook. And Abraham Katz finds this group, joins them. This group goes up to, and their plan is the following. They'll find somewhere to set up camp. They will teach themselves by getting jobs in the field, agriculture, how to cultivate the land, guard duty, defense, how to use weapons, etc. It'll take their time, but they will then eventually look for a place to start up a settlement. Abraham Katz joins them. They set up on a little hill just outside of Kfar Pinis, which is just by Pardes and Pardes Chana, thank you. There they set themselves up. Katz gets into trouble again. Nobody really knows why. Although there are some rumors, but he, together with one or two of his buddies, gets arrested in 1937 and thrown into the Akko jail. By the efforts of the Mizrahi organization, and once again, we are here in the building. Okay, this is the Mizrahi building. It's a Mizrahi that I'm speaking about, and he gets released after 4 months. And he writes a letter of appreciation to Mizrahi, which you probably can't see from there. But I'll just read a little, in pretty good Hebrew, by the way. And he says the following. B'shmi u'b'shem chaver Yoni somebody or another, modeh ba'ad hakol. Ve'anu mekavim, shemeh hayom v'hala be'ezrat Hashem, שיהיה שלום ושמething בארץ, ונוכל לבנות את ארצנו הקדושה בגדולתה על פי המסורת של תורה והמסורה, בברכת חברים לתורה ועבודה, אברהם כץ. In 1938, the following year, there's a call that goes out to all these kind of groups that shortly a group of 400 young men and women will be making an attempt to found a new kibbutz called Hanita on the northern Lebanese border, surrounded by hostile Arab villages. And in around about April of 1938, these kids go up there and they establish, the famous Chuma Migdal. They build the Migdal, the tower. They put a stockade around, and that night they create this kibbutz, which is to this day a thriving kibbutz up on the Lebanese border. Abraham Katz immediately volunteers and becomes a guard as part of the guard duty of this new kibbutz. On the 22nd of May at night, he does not, after his guard duty, he does not report back to the headquarters. They send out a search party and they find him bleeding and unconscious, and they evacuate him first to a hospital in Haifa and then back to Farpinas. But he's mortally wounded, and it's probably because he was such a vibrante and stubborn man, who was, by the way, somebody had said about him that he was a triple door type, a lion of a man. And he eventually succumbed to his injuries on the 1st of July 1938. One of the last things that he said, once again, which gives us an inkling of the kind of person he was, he says, now the man is dying, and he says from his bed, Mekomi lo po, mekomi bechanita. My place is not here, my place is in Chanita. He is buried in a very large funeral. He's buried in a very large funeral. This is his tombstone at the cemetery there. As you might see, Abraham Isser Katz, Nafal beHaganat Chanita, that is his tombstone to this day. He becomes a legend in two spheres. Number one, amongst the whole Tnu'ah here in Israel of the Kibbutz Hadati, they produce a 150-page book on a man that Sachakul was here for 3 years, which is filled with recollections and biography and thoughts about the late Abraham Katz. And he also becomes a hero in the fledgling Hashomer Hadati in South Africa. It is said that they were, at the time, most of the meetings took place in this little room in Dornfontein. And they took a portrait of Abraham Katz and they hung it on the wall. And a contemporary writes that there was a presence in the room. Abraham Katz's presence kind of permeated this room. The movement, by the way, in Chanita as well, there's a memorial plaque on this, again, a big stone of the fallen in Chanita in 1938 in the establishment of the kibbutz. This happens to be, we were up in the vacationing there one summer a couple of years ago, and we took them out to see this, to see the plaque. That's a couple of our grandchildren up in Chanita. The movement grows, and more Chaverim come in. On the extreme left standing, the young woman and man are Esti Steinmetz's parents. Okay, and the third from the left standing is Joe Green. Okay, the third from the left. I think Solly might be the fourth from the left. Yes. Solly, you've got some fourth from the left. Okay. Can anybody recognize anybody else in the picture?
I think my dad. Shirley, isn't that my dad in the front?
I think so.
Which one?
Second from the right.
Second from the right. Henry Michelson Henry Michelson, Reba's dad. Okay. I think the Lidgots are also there, both of them, in the top right, close to the top right-hand corner. And the gentleman over here, I want you to take note of him. The guy in the glasses, right over here. Okay? That man, his name was Chatzi Berelitz. Okay? Do people know what this is? What's that? Oh, really? Okay. Henry Michelson right at the top of the back, holding the whole thing together. By the way, one of the things that struck me about this particular photograph is that in most vernacular photographs, there generally are more males than females. Okay? In this photograph, there are more women than men. Why? It was the war years. Even some of the men that are there are in uniform. Okay? The guy, by the way, with a uniform with a cap at the top row on the left-hand side is Dave Wax. I don't know if that.
Yeah.
Fine, okay. We will get back to Dave Wax. Okay. We can just look at this photograph for those things. An eyewitness report says the following. That, remember I mentioned the picture in the room. That Chatzi Berelitz would often be seen staring intently at this picture of Abraham Katz on the wall. Abraham Katz was Chatzi Berelitz's hero. And therefore he becomes the second Oler of vernacular South Africa to make his difficult way up to Palestine. Where is he going to go? Chatzi Berelitz has only one thing in mind, and that is to follow in the footsteps of Abraham Katz, who is in Futsal Abraham. But they have now left that hilltop because in 1943 they are given a very, very special mission, and that is to create a kibbutz, a kfar, in a place called ETZION, up in the hills of in the Jerusalem hills. ETZION is a very modern name for a very ancient place of huge Jewish significance. This is the area where, and we read actually this Shabbat, Yaakov is dying and giving his final blessings to his sons and to his grandsons. But even then, in his heart is Rachel. And in his dying speech, amongst other things, he says, "Va'ani bevo'i mipadan meta alai Rachel be'eretz Canaan, b'derech ba'od kibrat eretz lavo Ephrata, ve'gbara sham b'derech Ephrat ki beit lachem." In this area, we all know that Kibbutz Rachel is in Bethlehem. This land is the land where Abraham and Yitzchak traveled on their way to Har Moriah. This land is where Ruth, the Moabiyah, gleaned the sheaves of wheat from Boaz's field. This land is the land where the Hashmonaim, certain groups of the Hashmonaim, hid in some of the caves in this land. It is replete with our heritage. What's ETZION? The Futsal Abraham is not the first group to attempt to settle for ETZION. There was one group even in 1929, very small group, that fell apart because of Arab rights. There was a gentleman who was born in the Ira HaAtika in Jerusalem. And his name was Shmuel Tzvi Holtzman, a Haredi man. They don't make Haredim like this anymore. And he was a kind of a maverick. He had these amazing business ideas, and he was a dreamer. For example, he bought a gold mine in Australia. He went to South Africa to see if he can find some business ventures there, but didn't succeed. And he got a great idea into his head in the mid-1930s. He said, all of these Yishuvim and kibbutzim are all popping up in the Shavei, in the coastal plain, but there's nothing up in the hills of Jerusalem. And a combination of his belief and his business ideas, he buys 5,200 dunam from the local Arabs, and he collects around him a number of investors and business partners, and they draw up these like grandiose schemes for developing this whole area. Residential and hotels and cultural centers and the whole spiel, okay? Like reams and reams and reams of architectural plans, we're going to do this. Okay. He was great at ideas, he wasn't so great at execution, and he had financial problems with us. He fought with his partners, and there were more Arab riots in the area, and eventually he gave up on it, and the land ceded to the Keren Kayemet, to the JNF. And the Keren Kayemet, we don't know who approached who, but the Keren Kayemet and Futsat Abraham get together, and they allocated the land to develop the land. 1943. They'd waited for 8 years until they finally found an opportunity, and by the time that Chetzi Berilowitz comes on Aliyah in 1944, and they'd just been there for a year, and he joins the group, and he started off working in the quarry and clearing rocks. Those of you who've lived there or have been there know that this is a very difficult rocky terrain, but he finds his true vocation in developing gardens for the houses and for a very special center that was being built there at the time. It was called Beit Ovadia. Beit Ovadia was designed to house artists and writers and musicians, people who were in the creative pursuits, to come up there in the fresh air of the Judean hills and to practice their art. And because the idea was to beautify this whole area, Chatzi Berilowitz took upon himself to do this. I think you'll find a little later that this was his kind of calling in terms of his personality. He has one other mission, and that is to honor the memory of his hero, Abraham Katz. So he approaches the Chevra that are building Beit Ovadia, and he says, is there any possibility of naming one of the halls in this complex Ulam Abraham? And they said to him, good idea, but it'll cost money to do it. Okay? If you can gather the money that it will take, the cost of building this hall, we will gladly name it after Abraham Katz. He approaches South Africans of all stripes, not just the religious. He approaches the South African community and asks them to donate money to fund this hall. And these pictures here, Abraham Chetzi Berilowitz is the young man with the glasses and the cap, both in this picture and in this picture. And the people around him are South African, visitors from South Africa, who he is taking on a tour of the development to try and persuade them to donate money to this hall. And he succeeds in this mission, and therefore one of the halls in Beit Ovadia is named after Abraham Katz. Shortly after Katz.
Where's Beit Ovadia?
By the way, it's right in Tzion. I was there last week. This picture, this is the original Beit Ovadia, and these two pictures I took a week ago at Beit Ovadia. It's in Tzion, very, very close to the museum. Yeah, you can. It's a 30-second walk from the museum.
Museum. That's not good. Yeah.
Shortly afterwards, another two of the Chevra decide that this is their time as well to make Aliyah and join the group. because they've been getting correspondence from Berelowitz saying, here I am, I'm doing the gardens, we're doing the things, Beit Ovadia. One of them is a woman called Rivka Pollen. Rivka Pollen came in 1945 together with Zvi Lipschitz. Zvi Lipschitz was born in the Ukraine in 1921. The family from there, he was the youngest of 3, as opposed to Berelowitz, who was the oldest of 8. He was the oldest son of 2 sons and 6 daughters. Lipschitz was the youngest son of two brothers and a sister. And the 2 of them arrived, and Lipschitz had made a name for himself in Johannesburg. He joined the movement. He was a charismatic guy. He was a great speaker. He was a great Baal Tefillah. He was a great Baal Horeb. He represented the Mizrahi, not just the young Mizrahi, but the whole of Mizrahi at some of the Zionist conferences, giving them very passionate speeches about the importance of Aliyah. By the way, when we talk about Aliyah, for all of the Zionism in South Africa up to the 1940s, there was very, very little Aliyah. In the 40 years between 1898, the founding of the Zionist Federation, to 1938, in those 40 years, and there were about 80,000 Jews in South Africa about that time, the total number of Olim was about 300 in those 40 years. It's only afterwards, in the 1940s, that, and there are good reasons for that, but all of these Hebrew were really breaking the mold. Lipschitz grew up in Bertram's or Dornfontein? Bertram's, okay, in Bertram's.
Our hometown.
Right. Aline's home suburb. And he was a madrich. By the time he left, he was already the Scatmanahel, the Scatmanahel of young Mizrahi. But again, he had the ideal and he made it happen. And he comes up to Tzion. As opposed to Berelowitz, who's doing the gardening, he's doing the sewage systems and building up the buildings. And he is a real tachlis kind of a guy, building up the kfar. A group comes, and they are inspirational. In another group of about 6 or 7 chevra, the following year come up and form the South African movement in Kfar ETZION. But the kibbutz Hadati is moving all these very rare resources, these chevra, around, trying to establish other places. And this group is given a mission to go and help establish Ein HaNatziv in the Jordan Valley, which is also a group of settlements in the Jordan. There's Ein HaNatziv, there's Shluchot, where there are a number of South Africans as well. Kibbutz Tzvi, right. So they go off there, but they need a madrich to go with them because they just arrived, they don't know the ropes, they don't know how to do the stuff. They ask Chesky Berelowitz to go up with them to Ein HaNatziv. And he says, it's difficult for me to leave the kfar here. I've built up all of these things, but if that's the instruction, I've got to obey it. And he goes up and he leaves Kfar ETZION. And he goes up to Ein HaNatziv. Zvi Lipschitz also has an opportunity to leave because of his charisma, and he's also a Talmid Chacham. He's given the opportunity of learning to become a rabbi, to join the rabbinate, which would mean, again, leaving Kfar ETZION. But he says, I can't leave. This is my place. Rivka Pollen marries a charismatic young man from Poland called David Teitelbaum. And they get married in a beautiful wedding on the kibbutz, and they have a son. This is, by the way, this is Zvi Lipschitz's family, his parents, his brother, his sister. Lipschitz himself is on the extreme. Zvi Lipschitz on the right-hand side, standing with his brother on the left, his sister and brother-in-law, and their young child sitting in between the grandparents. This is the only photograph that I know of that has in it both Lipschitz and Berelitz. A little group of Hebrew go off to Kibbutz Ashdod for a picnic. Probably, here we go, in 1945, shortly after the arrival of Lipschitz. And again, it's probably too small to really see, but somebody in the 1980s wrote this note identifying, this is a couple from England. This is Tzvi Lipschitz, and behind him is Chatzi Berelowitz. And somebody makes a note here afterwards that says, now, somebody recognized this gentleman over here as Mayor Wax. Mayor Wax is Dave Wax's brother who came on Aliyah with these groups. So I'm going to keep that the whole battle of Kfar Etzion short, but relating specifically to the three people that we've been talking about, Colin. Sorry, just to go back for 1 second. This is the map of the area. This is the original Kfar Etzion. In those 3 or 4 years, they established another 3 settlements: Revadim, Ein Surim, and Masuot Yitzchak. Revadim was a secular Shomer Tzair group who settled there, and the rest were Dati Hebra in Ein Surim and Masuot Yitzchak. As I mentioned, Berelowitz goes off to Ein Natzir. So what's he got to do with anything here? After he succeeds with this group in Ein Natzir, the Shomer Dati says the following: we need to send shlichim back to South Africa to encourage the Hebra to come on Aliyah and to train them in South Africa on agriculture, etc. And Chetzi Berelowitz, being a real Hebra man and having learned the ropes, he is the man. So they say to him, your next mission is to go back to South Africa to teach the Chaverim and to bring more Olim from the movement. And despite, of course he didn't want to do that, but that was the mission that he was given. The problem was that, again, if you think bureaucracy is problematic now, I mean, we all went through, not all of us, but many of us went through the bureaucracy of the 70s, the 80s. Well, the bureaucracy in the 40s, P kama v'kama between the British and the Jews and the South Africans and the Israelis and whatever, Sipur. In order to get all of his papers organized, he has to appear at the Sokhnut building like 3 or 4 times a week. The Sokhnut building right next to us over here. To schlep down from Ein Natzir, no ways. So he asked for permission to leave Ein Natzir for 2-3 weeks to get his papers organized. Then he'll go back and make his way eventually to South Africa. And he comes back. But where's he going to stay? I'll go back to my Hebron in Kfar Etzion, and I'll travel from the Kfar to Jerusalem 3 times a week. It is November 1947. And the 29th of November 1947, the famous resolution of partition is passed at the United Nations. And Chatzi Berelowitz is in Kfar Etzion, and the Arabs around the area start to riot and start to shoot and start to kill. And Chatzi Berelowitz gets a letter from the Sokhnut to say, Chatzi, your time has come, you've got to go back to Ein Natzir and from there to South Africa. And he writes the following letter. It's now a letter, the original's in Hebrew, but here's the English translation. And again, every time I read this, well, I'll leave it to you. He writes back like this: I've invested 3 years of labor in this place. Every stone and every corner is saturated with sweat here. I am tied to the people. I cannot leave them right now when they stand under siege and in solitude. Every hand is needed here now. But I hope that all of this will pass quickly and we will return and we'll see each other. I hesitated for many moments. This permission was given to me to leave. But why did I come here if not to fulfill such tasks? Forgive me, friends, for staying here with the besieged. Rivka Pollen is evacuated together with all of the non-combat women, married women with children. They're evacuated just before the final battle of GUSH ETZION. Her husband, David Teitelbaum, is killed amongst all the people that are killed in ETZION. Later on, she remarries. She has another daughter. And Rivka Pollen, today, at the age of 98, is living in Rehovot.
Wow.
Okay. Beredovitz and Svi Lipschitz are not the only South Africans that are involved in the final battles of GUSH ETZION. The word machal. Anybody? Yeah, we all know what machal is. Okay, the mitnadvei chayalim le'shetzahal. In 1948, be very careful, please, of the. Okay, in 1948, the South Africans sent 646 chaverim to Israel as volunteers to join the fledgling Haganah and IDF. 646 out of a total population of under 100,000. I mean, it's remarkable. And of all their great achievements, probably the two most noteworthy are they were very instrumental in founding the Israeli Air Force. Okay, many of the first pilots, they brought many of the first planes with them, and they also were instrumental in very much setting up commercial airlines. Before El Al, there was a couple of guys who bought a couple of planes, and they were flying people in and out of Israel commercially. So both El Al and the Israeli Air Force had a very strong roots in the South African Chaverim of the Machal. Two of those pilots, one of them's name was Elliot Rosenberg. Elliot Rosenberg was so far removed from the ethos of these guys. He was a completely assimilated, secular, non-aligned guy. But he heard about this fight in Israel and he said, okay, I think I'm Jewish, so I'm going to go and help these guys. He gets a mission on the 6th of May, 1948, 1 week before the final battle, was a Friday, to fly in his little Oyster plane, to fly into ETZION, land on the road, drop off supplies, and bring back 2 wounded Hebrew from ETZION. He does that, but it turns out that they're not 2 wounded, there are 3 wounded. He stuffs them into the back of the plane, and because it's so heavy, as they're taking off, the propeller hits a rock, and the propeller hits a rock, and he's slightly wounded in his back, and they take him to the Mirpa'ah at ETZION. And he describes the scene as following. They took me there, they strapped up my back, and they radioed to the Haganah headquarters in Jerusalem, who said they would send in a plane on Sunday to come and pick him up. He says, these are strange people. I wanted to have a smoke. Oh, first he says, they put a yarmulke on my head. and he wanted to have a smoke. Just been through a very traumatic experience. They asked him, please, as it's now the Sabbath, to please to go outside the fence of the phone and have a smoke there. He's picked up on Sunday and he flies out. The second was a pilot, a young South African pilot called Cyril Katz. Cyril Katz is sent by the Haganah from Jerusalem, from Atarot, to fly over the Kfar and everybody knew of the terrible situation that was unfolding in ETZION. And he was told to fly off. He had another South African in the back seat, literally with bombs on his lap. Okay? And he was told to fly over and bomb the Jordanians. They throw the bombs out. He describes the scene as shocking and pathetic and desperate, that he sees the Kfar being overrun by the Jordanians. He says he noticed they saw that one of the Jordanian armored cars had actually exploded, but they weren't sure if it was from the bomb chucker or if it was from fire emanating from the car. Chasky Berelowitz is killed on the Thursday, the 12th of May, running in between two posts to deliver a message from one to the other. And Tzvi Lipschitz is killed in the final battle on the 13th of May. All except for 4 are either killed in battle or massacred after the battle in the Kfar, and their bodies are dumped by the Jordanians into a mass grave on the Kfar. The next day the State of Israel is established, and we probably all know that Yom HaZikaron in Israel is the day before Yom HaTzmaut. Honestly, when I was a kid growing up and they said it's the day before, I thought, well, it's the day before because it's it's going from the sacrifice to the celebration. But in fact, we all know here that that's kind of uncomfortable, celebrating and coming up to Yom HaTzmaut. But Ben Gurion says that this is the greatest battle. Here we go. David Ben Gurion says, I do not know of a more glorious, tragic and heroic struggle in all of the valiant battles of the Israel Defense Forces than that of GUSH ETZION. Their sacrifice, more than any other war effort, saved Jerusalem. The GUSH ETZION campaign is the great and terrible epic of the Jewish war. If a Hebrew in Jerusalem exists, the gratitude of Jewish history goes first and foremost to the fighters of GUSH ETZION. And when I said at the beginning that these are people that touched everybody's lives in this room, not just in this room, every Jew that can come to Israel and come eventually to the Kotel or come to Jerusalem is beschut these chevra. In 1949, Israel negotiates with the Jordanians, and they exhume the bodies and reinter them at Har Herzl. The streets are lined with thousands and thousands of Jerusalemites who come to give thanks to these Chaverim that sacrificed their lives so that Jerusalem can survive that war. This here is read it from here. An account of one of the South African Hebrew, Jacob Perlman, his name was, who was in Kfar Darom, again one of the Olim from Hashomer Dati. And he writes the following: on Thursday morning, 17th of November 1949, a row of 35 heavy vehicles was set out from the Jewish Agency building, right here, right across from here, on its way to Har Herzl, with the remains of the 300 who fell at Kfar Tzion and Latrun. There was also, they buried Chevra that were killed at Latrun. I stood on the step of the truck number 31, and tears formed and fell as I looked upon the coffins containing the remains of our Chaverim, Yecheskel, Berelowitz, and Tzvi Lipschitz, as memories of the years that I had known and worked with them went through my mind. Each truck and coffin had its mourners, and the weeping and crying of the parents and the relatives stopped suddenly as the eldest son of Kfar Tzion, now the age 9, said Kaddish. My lips moved too to the sound of the holy words. Slowly the convoy made its way through the streets of Jerusalem to the grave of Herzl. The pavements were lined with the inhabitants of the city, with sadness and tears, and also a thankful look on their faces. They were giving honor and thanks to their liberators. And when I saw the rows and rows of school children standing in mourning, I thought, as the Israeli officer had said, my conscience is clear, but my heart is heavy, for was this not worth it? Berelowitz and Lipschitz, just like the cats before them, become iconic figures in the Shomer Dati B'nai Akiva youth movement in South Africa. commemorative booklets or put out in their names. Funnily enough, I read in two different sources that, and maybe some of you remember this, that at Bnei Akiva, I remember in the 1970s, Bnei Akiva Shul, the highlight of the year was Simchat Torah. And two accounts tell me that they had a special Yizkor for Berelovitz and Lipschitz on Simchat Torah. Now, we know, unlike in Israel, it's a two-day Chag. The first day is Shmini Atzeret and Yizkor and Geshem, very solemn, and Simchat Torah is a big party. But there, probably because there was such a big concentration and crowd of Hebra coming for Simchat Torah, that they made the Yizkor for those two on Simchat Torah. The GUSH lies empty and barren for 19 years, but Lipschitz and Berelovitz are absolutely and utterly not forgotten in the movement. And here we have somebody in the room speaking about, you're going to have to listen carefully because the sound is not so great. Talking about her experiences as a Chanicha in the movement in the early 1960s.
I was Brosha Slesky originally, and my father Zeli Katz. Yeah. And in this photo is a photo of Chatzki Belerovitz.
Yeah. How did you know all these people?
Because they were friends. They used to come to my father, and even if they'd come on Aliyah and they used to come back to South Africa, they used to come to us. At that time, in the 1940s, my mother was she must have been very young though, but she finished school at like 15, so she was in high school, but I don't know exactly how old she was. She was like the Rakezet Hadracha of Hashomer Dati. And she used to write these chovrot. She used to get chomer and write the chovrot. And one of the people who helped her with this was Chatzki Berelovitz. And when he went on Aliyah, he wrote to her, and she obviously wrote to him, and they had a tichtovet. And, I don't know say tichtovet in English.
Correspondence.
Yeah, and okay. So some of those letters, many years ago when I was in South Africa, my mother passed away 40-something years ago, but 30-something years ago when I was in South Africa, my aunt gave me a bunch of letters, and I looked through them. Some of them are from Chatzki Berelovitz, some of them are from other people who were in this garin to Kfar ETZION. They weren't killed there. Some of them went afterwards to Hachshara, to El Natzivot, to Natzvi. And they're very interesting. One of the things that really caused me to, to be excited was where Chatzki Berelovitz talks about there's a new kibbutz just being built up here by Bogrei Bnei Akiva, that's Entzurim, was built up by Bogrei Bnei Akiva. And he talks about how they alul hashetach and all things like that. And like, here I am in Gush Etzion, and the kashur.
Right.
But that was these letters. When I was growing up in Bnei Akiva, I went to Bnei Akiva from an early age. I don't remember exactly, maybe 8, 9. And, so I don't know, must have been standard 1, 2. And one of the things you had to do in Bnei Akiva in those days when you were in Gurim was to read this little blue book, and it was there was Tzad Rishon, Tzad Sheni, and I don't know what the rest was called. But Tzad Rishon was the story of Rabbi Akiva, and you had to know about the Semel of Torah and Avodah, what it was, and you got a badge. And you could put it on your uniform, had it sewn on with pressed studs in those days. Yeah. And Tzad Sheni was the story of Kfar ETZION, and you had to learn about the 3 people who belonged to Kfar ETZION and were killed. The first one was Avram Issa Katz. He was not killed in Kfar ETZION, but he belonged to the same Chavurah. Okay,
it was called Futzat Abraham.
So we had to learn about the story of Avram Issa Katz. We had to learn the story of Tzvi Lifshitz and the story of Chatzki Berelovitz. And then you were tested on it by your madrich, and you got your second semel badge, and you sewed it onto the other side of your uniform in the other pocket. They were starting going Snoopy to the kibbutz Rosh Tzurim, and I decided that I'm going to live here. I'm a nurse in a gun shikumi
Where?
in Alonshvut, and it's good to work 5 minutes away from your house, and my gun is back.
I'm going to switch on the lights just a second. I had something in my head was just incomplete about these two Hebrew. These are two Lipschitz and Berelowitz. We know the biographies, we know the whole, all the raw details of their lives. But what kind of a person does it take to become so committed and so fervent and be prepared to sacrifice your life for this cause? Is there some kind of stamp? Can you say he has to be forthright and decisive and whatever? What does it take to be a person like this? These two young men did not have children. They both died before they could be married. There's nobody that remembers them. But there is another way of finding a window to a person's soul. And that is if you can find a letter or letters that these people have written. Because letters always, whether you think it or not, reveal something about you. Esther had letters written to her parents, to her mother, by Chesky Berelowitz. Reva had letters written by Chatzi Berelowitz to her father. And we got hold of those letters. Thank you, ladies. Tzvi Lipschitz, gone. And then a little miracle happened. A few years ago, Tzvi Lipschitz's great niece is clearing out her machzan before Pesach. Okay? And she remembers that in the corner there's an old box. And that box she got from her mother, to keep it when her great-grandmother, Tzvi Lipschitz's mother, died. And she's put this box in the corner and they say, yeah, what's inside this box? She opens up the box and she finds a treasure. She finds 108 letters written by Tzvi Lipschitz to his parents, to his mother, to his parents, to his siblings, in Yiddish. From Kfar Tzion. 108 letters in a very short period of time when this guy was working very, very hard. And these letters uncover the souls of these Shavei. I'm going to read you excerpts from some of the letters. Again, it could be all night if I read the whole thing. But hold on a second. These letters that Lipschitz has written are all in Yiddish. I don't know if you guys, well, you probably more. I told you. Okay, so the word, I said one of the few words I know is for Brent. But we can't read these letters. Tzvi Lipschitz's nephew, whose name is also Tzvi, Harry Lipschitz, named after him by his brother, who named his son after his late brother, remembers that growing up in Bez Valley there, or Bertram's, is the Zakheim family, and a contemporary is that, yeah, I remember my friend Eileen, I wanted to, let's go Yiddish at her. Maybe she could do something about this. And he sends her a sample of these letters. And Eileen Zakheim Friedman, in a labor of intense love, translates into English every single one of those letters.
Wow.
Okay, and these letters, what's that? They're online. You can read them all, and I think they're on the National Library. They're all there. I'm going to read you just a few excerpts and see if you get the drift. I'm sure, especially when I'm speaking to ladies who are much more sensitive to these things than people like me. Okay. Dear brother, I thank you for your short letter from Musenberg. In the contents of your letter, I notice that you're not happy with my present home. It will take many pages for me to write about the kibbutz, So it's not a punishment camp or a jail. The kibbutz is a reservoir of Jewish knowledge and culture. The kibbutz is the orphanage, the old age home, and the recreation place for the refugees who have come from the Shoah. If the kibbutz would cease to exist, it would be a tragedy, maybe as great as the tragedy in Europe. Dear parents, you may tell the mothers of these sons and daughters, the Chevra back in Joburg, that you and I know that I will not stop working towards influencing them to come to Eretz Israel. The plans of these parents that are making their sons and daughters to remain in the diaspora should be destroyed. The Jewish daughters and sons must build up the homeland. The project can be done better through ETZION, because the name ETZION stimulates the imagination of the Chaverim. He then describes the excitement about establishing. I think he wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning to start working, to establish one of those new kibbutzim that I spoke about earlier. He also has a lot of bikurit. Remember, he was an eloquent speaker. And this is what he says about the speakers who come to speak at ETZION. Meetings here are the same as in South Africa. They talk. One wants to overshadow the other, and the one who speaks the longest asks the next speaker not to speak too long. And in the evening, there were very many important guests from Jewish royalty, and that means from the Jewish agency. They do not know how to speak. The speakers, thank God, stopped speaking, and the people started dancing. We have to develop and build more courage and strength. Physical and emotional strength is needed. Today, more than ever before, we stand closer to redemption. The oppressed people are cleansing themselves, and with new blood are regaining their former strength. Youth are prepared for everybody. Parents, be proud. With power and courage, speak about your sons and daughters. Praise and boast about them. They are your children, and they're growing as a cedar tree by the water. Am Yisrael Chai. December 1947, okay? The Lamed Hay, the Neve Daniel convoy, things got terrible in the GUSH. The past few days will go down in history of the Jewish people as one of the greatest over the past 2,000 years. And now, for the third time, there was the exodus of Egypt, the second exodus of Babylon, and now the third. Now the Jewish people are now living this, the third time, even though many hardships stand before our eyes. But the existence of the Jewish people has been recognized. The 17th of April 1948, 3 weeks before he was killed. Dear parents, we are waiting for the exodus of the British, who will seriously start the last days of, we will seriously start which will start on the last days of Pesach. This day will be written in the Chumash, that our earliest enemy sunk deep into the depths of the Red Sea, and to this Moses said, sing. Let us hope to sing for the exodus of our present and greatest enemy. This is on Pesach of 1948. That is Tzvi. Would anybody like to throw out what kind of a character this guy must have been? Excuse me? Yes, for rent, but anything, yeah, okay. So here are the adjectives that I find, for myself, to find appropriate for this. What's that? Absolutely.
And linked to the land.
Linked to the land. Okay, they're all linked to the land. But here, this is what occurred to me. Self-assured, confrontational, visionary, very demanding of himself and others, a take-no-prisoner kind of guy, and an analytical perfectionist. Okay? Here are a couple of excerpts from Chesky Beredis, writing to Bracha, to Esther's mom. Thank you for your most welcome and interesting letter. Just to juxtapose that with the first thing that I read from it. Thank you for your short letter from Mizrach. I'm indeed ashamed of myself. Would Tzvi Lipschitz ever write, I'm ashamed of myself? What are you talking about? I'm indeed ashamed of myself that I've not answered before. I was just lazy, nothing else. It was indeed most interesting to read your educational program. He's writing to somebody in South Africa who she has sent him her educational program that she's put together to teach the Chaverim in Bnei Akiva for his comments. It was indeed most interesting to read your educational program, and I would not offer any criticism or additional comments. I would, however, like to add just a note on your course on Zionism. There was obviously a course on Zionism that he very, very gently prodded her with an idea. Writing to Henry, by now you must indeed be wondering when you will be hearing from me. However, thanks to God, I am in Eretz Israel and happily rejoicing in the life of kibbutz. It indeed was an unusual experience, never having to travel in my life. He talks about his travels to Israel. I saw strange people, heard strange sounds, and smelled peculiar smells. This life is indeed agreeing with me, and I with it. Of course, I need not tell you of its significance for Eretz Israel. Lipschitz would have exactly told him what he said, but another letter to Bracha. Good morning to you. How are you feeling on this bright and sunny morning? It is interesting to know what might be happening in the rest of the world on such a bright and beautiful day here in Palestine. Next door is a new kibbutz, 2 weeks old, which is being built up on this fine day, as it is on all fine days, by a group of youth from the Bnei Akiva. Although to the world at large we seem to be an insignificant number of cranky idealists, out to live a communal village life in a capitalist environment, it's not so insignificant. You really have to be here to see the enthusiasm of the throng. What kind of a young man was this Chetzi Beremus? To me, it sounds like he's an anti-hero. Like he's the sensitive, non-confrontational Chaverman. That same man writes a letter to the Mizrahi saying, I cannot leave my brethren here in Tzion. The adjectives that I wrote down here were quiet, spiritual, Chaverman, aesthetic sensibility, friendly and considerate. Wow, what two amazingly differing personalities. However, Lipschitz does have one thing that he's not so sure about. I still have not found him. The problem is that I keep on sizing them up and comparing them to my previous girlfriend, Greta Oskowitz. Greta Oskowitz, 2 of her daughters are here. That's right. Tzion and Lani's mother, who already in the pictures before, she's together with Sol Liebgott. Okay, but they were obviously girlfriend with the Tzvi Lipschitz before Sol. Then he asks her, the only kind of opinion that he's ever asking anybody for is in this situation. Mother, today the kibbutz is full of lovely girls, and in each one of them I find a flaw. One is not so pretty, the next one is not so slim, and one is not so clever. Expectations are very high. One wanted to give me the writings of Oscar Wilde, and I refused to take it. She was so upset, so out of pity I took it from her. A second, a teacher from England, spent a week with us, sent me good cigarettes as she thought that I smoked. Another one gave me an album. My friends with whom I share a room said, your father must be a banker in order to repay everyone with all their presents that he received. One is driving me crazy, and I ask God every day that she should leave the kibbutz. She is unfortunately not doing this. Then he writes something to his mother. Again, this week I have a problem which is hard for me to neglect. This is a problem that happens to every young man and girl in their young years. I am really, darling mother, not capable, better to say, not sure which of the 2 girls is more suited to me, and there's another 2 girls. Dearest mother, and this to me is the most poignant, because this assured, self-assured young man, dearest mother, God created love, loyalty, and hope. 9/10 were given to the mothers, and 1/10 to the rest. A mother's love is the greatest of all love. A mother's loyalty can be trusted. A mother's hope is woven with so much certainty, optimism, and courage. Tzvi Lipschitz had a big heart as well. As Esti described, the movement continued to give iconic status to these two heroes. And when in 1967 the IDF liberated Jerusalem and all of these areas, the people started coming back. We've gone on too long, so I'm going to cut out the rest. But just to say that, just to tell you of one other anecdote. All of the Hebrew, as I began by saying that we're all in all of these Chaverim in GUSH ETZION, which become much, much greater than the original Kfar ETZION, contributing to the life of the people there. But if anything convinces me that there is not a coincidental connection, I just want to I have to just play you one thing which kind of makes a connection. Here is the Hebrew from the Garin at Alon Shvut.
הקמנו את גרעין אלון עציון. הגרעין התחיל בעצם מההחלטה ליישם את האידיאולוגיה של בני עקיבא. האידיאולוגיה של בני עקיבא כמובן הייתה אידיאולוגיה שדגלה בעלייה ארצה והתיישבות בארץ ישראל והקמת יישובים באותו עת קיבוצים.
ועלה הרעיון לבוא לאלון שבות, שזה היה זה היה יישוב קהילתי, שזה היה דבר די חדש אז בזמנו. ואהבנו את הרעיון, זה היה קרוב לירושלים מצד אחד, צד שני זה היה גם כן חלוצי.
מה גרם לכם לחשוב דווקא אלון שבות ולא...
גדלנו על הסיפורי למד וחבר'ה שנפלו וכפר עציון
אבל היה גם קשר עם דרום אפריקה.
אבל ברוך תפס את ה...
כן, אז דרך הסוכנות.
Another tragic connection connects us South Africans to GUSH ETZION. Dalia Lemkes, in 2014, a beautiful young woman who grew up in Chikoa with her parents, is murdered by terrorists at the Soviet at Alon Shvut by terrorists, adding to the saga of our connection with this holy place. I was doing research for this evening at the archives of GUSH ETZION with a remarkable woman called Orla Rottenberg, who is the oldest of the children born. She's now close to 90 years old. She was evacuated. She's the oldest kid to be, yes, is that Orla Rottenberg says to me in the course of our few hours that we spent in Meratek, everybody should go there sometime. She's taken out the files of her relatives and Lipschitz and even Aron Katz has got a file there. And she says to me quite casually, Hashem Yosef Green, the name Joe Green, does it mean anything to you? I said, of course it means something to me. He was the founder of Bnei Akiva South Africa. Joe Green never came on Aliyah. He died and was buried in Johannesburg. She says to me, אתה יודע שהוא קבור פה? She said to me, Kabul. I ran down, I said to Ora, give me a break of half an hour. I ran down to the Kfar ETZION cemetery and found the grave. What happened was I pulled up his daughter, Rina Tiga, who lives here in Israel. And I said, Rina, what's the story here? And here is the story. He dies and is buried in, what's it called, West Park? West Park. And Dave Wax, remember I mentioned Dave Wax at the beginning? Yeah. One of the boys, the original Hebra. Dave Wax says, no, this is not right. Joe Green has to lie in the place that was closest to his heart. The places closest to Joe Green, the founder of B'nai Akiva South Africa, the closest place to his heart is Kfar Tzion. Thank you so much for listening to this.
Thank you.
כולנו רקמה אנושית אחת חיה, ואם אחד מאיתנו הולך